To a fantastic edition of Rebellion's educational series. I'm here with the executive director of Battleship Cove, Meghan Rathbun, who's one of the smartest minds I've come across in naval history and one of the sweetest individuals. Meghan, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, and you are very kind.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love the USS Massachusetts. She's absolutely one of my favorite battleships, and Battleship Cove is super awesome. Everyone needs to visit that museum when they get a chance. So I hope all of our viewers will head there one day. But my first question is on the maintenance of this ship. 1,800 people in peacetime would take care of her, 2,200 during wartime. How does your museum take care of such a gigantic ship?
So it's a challenge, and it's something that all historic ships face. No matter their budget, no matter their size, there's always more to be done because we don't have the staff size that they did. Obviously, when the ships were active, you had multiple deck divisions just in charge of the teak deck, and we don't have that anymore. So we juggle what we can do with staff versus what we can do with volunteers and what we have to bring contractors in for. So, a lot of our really big projects we're doing right now are contractor work, but we also have a lot of volunteer-led projects where they're restoring certain areas of the ship, or building us new things. Like we have an entire 3D print lab that's been created by my volunteers, and they sourced the 3D printers and got them donated, and they've built this whole lab, and they're starting to fabricate missing parts from the ship that were either taken when she was in mothballs or taken in the 1980s when they modernized the Iowas. The Navy came aboard in Massachusetts and just took everything that wasn't nailed down in the 80s that they hadn't already taken. So we're missing light switches, light fixtures, the little lights for Broadway, the electrical panels and different things like that. And my volunteers are 3D printing all of those. So we're getting very creative with how we take care of these ships with a smaller budget, a smaller staff or crew. But it is definitely a challenge.
Wow. Yeah, no, it seems like an amazing challenge. So one of our questions comes from a great battleship mind, Matt Chaser, who wants to know about the ham radios. Are there still ham radios aboard the ship?
So we have a radio room that's been fully restored, and we have radios that work throughout the ship. And we actually do have ham radio operators that come aboard. And next weekend, which is our World War II weekend, actually, no, I lied, the 24th, if I'm looking at my date right, we will have them aboard, which is yesterday, as for recording. We had ham radio operators aboard, going out on the radios and talking to other historic ships and other radio enthusiasts. So they do come aboard regularly, and we're very lucky to have them here. We also had them on the Missouri, so I know they all talk. So if anyone's ever interested, they do certain days, and you can get on the airwaves and chat to people aboard the Massachusetts.
That's super cool. Our next question comes from another awesome battleship mind, Eric Meyer. He wants to know about this famous 28,000 meter shot that hit a French destroyer. Have you heard of this?
I have. So the story goes, and the one that we believe is that Massachusetts is the longest 16-inch projectile that hit something. And there's been research in the past, but Vincent O'Hara, who's a historian who's written about Massachusetts, he actually just had a new book come out through the Naval Institute Press. He is doing even more research into this, going through war logs, going through everything to see that we can definitively say. So as soon as we have the proof and we can show it, I will be screaming that from the rooftops, because I believe that we do have the longest 16-inch shot fired in anger that hit something. So.
And she bombarded, Japan's home island at the end of World War II as well, right?
She did. So she fired the last 16-inch projectile. So she fired the first American 16-inch projectile of World War II in Operation Torch. And then she fired the last 16-inch projectile as well. And that was bombarding the steel and iron works on the home islands on August 9th, which was, we know, the day they dropped the second atomic bomb. So right before the surrender.
So I know Jean Bart is one of your favorite battleships. Is that painful for you to be the?
Oh, you kid, but I studied French history a lot in my undergraduate, so it's an interesting one now to be on the American side. But it's such a cool story, especially because in World War II, that many battleships, you didn't really get battleships fighting under battleships anymore. They were doing a lot of shore bombardment and carrier protection in the fast carrier forces, especially with kamikaze planes, and the rise of that tactic. So to have a to work aboard a battleship that actually fought another battleship is amazing. And it's a really cool story, but it's a wild one. We always have to say, like, it's a French battleship, but it's Vichy French. It wasn't, we weren't fighting.
No. And it was still at harbor. It wasn't even out to sea.
No, it was tied up to the pier and wasn't actually fully operational, but they did manage to fire shots back at the Massachusetts. She does have damage from that attack. And if you come aboard, you can actually see where an 8-inch projectile came through the deck. We have the plate aboard where the projectile went through. We have it on display. You can see it. And then you can see shrapnel damage in multiple places on the ship from where she was hit. And luckily, no crew were killed. But yeah, it's amazing.
Very cool. It's really awesome to see actual fragments from World War II. I know our friend Ryan Szymanski was showing some bullet holes that he saw in Pearl Harbor that were still preserved so many years later. So no, very, very exciting. So our next question comes from David O'Connell. And he wants to know about the boiler rooms and the engine room. Can you visit them?
You can. We have them open on the battleship. And it's on the self-guided tour route, so you can come down and see the engineering spaces. You can also walk all of Broadway, and you can get into, it's plexiglassed off, but you can see damage control, medical, everything down in those lower parts of the ship. And every once in a while, we do very special engineering tours. For instance, we have one October 1st for our World War II weekend, where we actually do guided tours through those engineering spaces. So you can learn all you ever wanted to know about how a steam plant works aboard a battleship.
How deep are the catacombs of the USS Massachusetts?
They go deep. I mean, you can go very far down into the ship. If you were doing maintenance or some of the project work we're doing now, people are actually going down into some of our tanks, like the blister tanks and things, doing work. But I've been not on this ship, but I have been pretty deep into the bowels of battleships before. And once you get down into some of the hull spaces, it gets very eerie. Because you can see the actual curvature of the hull through the frames, which is wild to see. But yeah, third deck and the engineering spaces is the lowest you can go on the tour route.
Do you get sick at all when you go into the catacombs? Do you feel okay with it?
No, I'm fine with all of that. I used to be terrified of heights, but working on a battleship really beat that out of me. So I'm pretty good. I've toured a lot of historic ships, and almost always I end up going into very confined spaces. So you kind of get used to it.
Well, you're lucky. We interviewed a former crew member from the USS New Jersey about 2 weeks ago, and he said that when he would go into the New Jersey's catacombs, he would get terrible sickness. His stomach would go into his throat, and it was absolutely painful for him. So.
Oh yeah, I mean the anxiety if you have any sort of anything like that. But I've been pretty far up into the hull on some of the battleships, and it can be unnerving, and if you hear the water moving or see it. But the only time I've ever felt anxiety aboard a ship was when I went aboard a nuclear sub, one of the boomers, and my brain just had this panic of you're in a steel tube in the water with no way out. We were tied up to the pier, sub wasn't going anywhere, but I freaked out a little bit then. But otherwise, no problems.
It happens. So Chuck Steele, a great naval mind, naval teacher, was wondering how much it costs to maintain the USS Massachusetts on a yearly basis.
A lot. And it depends on what we're doing. So we're finishing up a huge project right now. We were very lucky to get a huge donation from the state of Massachusetts, about $1 million to paint the hull. And that's just the freeboard, to paint the freeboard from the waterline up to the main deck, and to address rust in the waterways. So these ships are incredibly expensive. When the Navy operated them, they were spending tens of millions, if not more, a year just in maintenance costs when these ships were active, especially when you look at the battleships in the 80s and the 90s. So, we do a lot with volunteer labor. We do a lot where we have companies donate materials or resources to us. And that's all just to help us with costs because we are a nonprofit. And we have 4 ships in the water here. So some organizations have maintenance for 1 ship. I have to do 4 ships worth of maintenance. So it becomes kind of a bit of a juggling act to make sure that every ship's getting taken care of.
So another battleship mind I really respect, Randolph Decker. He's curious about the Washington Treaty limits. Do you think if they had been able to increase the hull length, they would have been able to obtain more speed for her?
Well, I think the easiest thing to look at is the design of the Iowas. So they're the fast battleships that were built, right after the Sodaks, and they are faster, they are longer. So I think, we were really holding on to those treaties. And I think if we had not and just gone with the fast battleship design that we really see with the Iowas, you could have gone faster with this. There, it's very interesting seeing the way this ship is designed, because you can feel the lack of that 200 feet from an Iowa. And it's interesting to see. I think it would have been a really neat exercise to see how they would have done the Sodaks without the treaty, if they would have just gone straight for what they did with the Iowas. But yeah, you definitely probably would have been able to get faster. But
Well, obviously, you were the director of Missouri prior.
mhm.
Beyond length, what is the main difference that was the first thing that comes to your mind between Missouri and Massachusetts?
So they're that 200 feet longer, which kind of stretches everything out and makes it a little bit bigger space wise. But their crew size was almost the same. But the other big difference you get is the caliber of the guns. So they're both 16-inch, but this ship has 16-inch 45s versus the Iowas have the 16-inch 50s. So it's a slightly bigger caliber, and that increases your range and the shells a bit. So that's a big change. Otherwise, they're largely similar in that they have the same number of 5-inch guns. They both ended up with extra anti-aircraft guns that we didn't plan on thanks to the rise of airplanes. But that's the biggest one. In fact, if you spend a lot of time aboard an Iowa and then you come aboard a Sodak, things are in the same places. It's very trippy. It's like the Twilight Zone.
And for our viewers who aren't as well versed, a Sodak is a South Dakota class battleship.
Yeah, South Dakota class. So obviously South Dakota, the first in class. You also have Indiana, Massachusetts, and Alabama. So those are the 4 in that class. And then you get the Iowas after.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you so much, Megan. This was really a lot of fun chatting today. And I guess my last question is on Battleship Texas. She just went to dry dock. When will Massachusetts need dry dock next?
So she was dry docked in 99. And so one of the things we've been doing as part of this preservation project right now is we did a pretty in-depth look at her hull, and her hull's actually in remarkably good condition because she was dry docked in 99. So I'm not terribly worried about her needing to go to dry dock right now. It's something we'll discuss in the future, but a lot of historic ships are working to see how much they can do at the pier without needing to go to dry dock, because it can be so expensive. I mean, you look at how much Texas is spending to go to dry dock, or even Nautilus just came out of dry dock and they spent $35 million on a submarine.
Yes.
So it was a huge amount. So Massachusetts' hull is in really good shape. So I don't think we need to go in the immediate future.
Yeah, no, that was a massive spend on Nautilus. Of course, Nautilus is an American icon. And
yes. And she's got a slightly interesting thing being a nuclear submarine. She's got some requirements when she goes to dry dock.
she was useless in Midway, but
I've got a soft spot in my heart for submarines, so I think she's very neat.
No, I know you're from a submarine family, so
yes.
That is very cool. For our viewers, Megan's, both your father and your grandfather were submarine captains, and
nope, just my grandfather.
Just your grandfather. But your father was the. Well, tell us about your father. What he did.
So my father wasn't in the Navy, but my uncle was in the Army. So my uncle served in Vietnam and was in intelligence in Vietnam. I don't know entirely what he did because he doesn't speak about it much. But my grandfather was in for 40 years, and
but he was instrumental in the beginning of the submarine academy. And
so he was at the sub school. He was the CEO of the sub school in the 60s. And then he helped build the nuclear sub program. He was working on it with Rickover and did a lot with SubSafe after the Thresher went down.
Yeah. Thresher is something we've covered intently. That was
so
that day American history.
It was. And my grandfather's submarine, he was actually the first submarine to respond to the Thresher going down. And my dad was best friends with the CEO's sons. On the Thresher, because the Thresher was going through and being built at the same time my grandfather's last submarine, the Thomas Jefferson, was. So my family were very close to their family when that accident and all that happened. So
awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun, and good luck with winter preservation this winter.
the added challenge of being below a bridge adds all of the salt spray from the bridge comes down on the ships. So that's a challenge.
That is a challenge. Are you going to have an annual party, annual benefit to raise funds for the museum?
So this year we brought back our annual swing dance. We do a 1940s swing dance with a full like 20-piece band, and it's a lot of fun. And this year we did it on the pier or on a building on the land because we were doing the fantail preservation. Next year we will be doing it on the fantail, so a swing dance on the fantail with a 1940s band, and that's a big fundraiser for us. And otherwise we do lots of events through the year.
Wow, that sounds awesome, Megan. Well, this was a lot of fun talking today, and you have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Be well. Thank you.